is Robert Asencio, and I've got the great pleasure of introducing a South Florida native, Navy veteran, CEO of a nationally recognized mental health service provider by the name of Eric Golnick. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Robert. Really great to be on, man. Thank you.
Brother, we've been going back and forth about connecting, getting you on the show. This is a new show that we launched, and the purpose is to educate the community, show them that they're not alone, and walk them through the resources, identify the issues, but walk them through the resources that are available to them, and show them, like you, how they can not only overcome conditions, but also, come out on the other side as a very healthy, strong individual, productive individual.
Absolutely.
So, Eric, let's get into it real quick. Today we're going to talk about PTSD. And as I share with you offline, I was very, very shocked to find out this statistic that the American Psychiatric Association estimates that about 8 million Americans across the country are dealing with the diagnosis of PTSD. That's something that you yourself dealt with, and you have immense courage by sharing your story. And I want you to share your story with us about how you, after serving our country during wartime, dealt with PTSD, what you look for, what you found, and the void that you are actually filling by providing help. But before we go into your background, I want to share a little bit, another piece here with the audience. One is that Eric was a commissioned officer in the U.S. Navy. He worked for command, and he was deployed during 2011, the area of Japan where there was a tsunami, there was an earthquake, or actually the earthquake, then tsunami, then there was a nuclear meltdown, the Fukushima nuclear plant. Eric, in his career, dealt with a lot of service members who actually suffered and struggled, and some of them are no longer with us. And then after you left the military, you yourself experienced PTSD, right? Congratulations on your doctoral.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
University of Miami alum, right? You
That's
graduated
right.
with honors. But let's talk about how you dealt with PTSD and how you find yourself in this arena post the military.
Yeah, for sure. And it's definitely an interesting, and I love the statistic you brought. I don't love it, but I love that you brought it up, that the amount of people that are dealing with trauma and post-traumatic stress, we're not just talking about veterans and first responders. A lot of people are dealing with trauma. Trauma is something that affects our entire population. We obviously deal with it. Veterans and first responders see it a little bit more often, and the frequency is more, but it is an important thing to say that a lot of Americans deal with trauma. So it's a big problem across the board. But with my personal trauma, right, like you had mentioned, I had one of my sailors that was struggling, and you were in the military as well. You were a police officer. It's a lot of these guys, they become family to you, right? Guys and gals, they become family. And one of my guys, he wound up unfortunately taking his life in front of me and died in the ambulance on the way to the base hospital. And, it didn't affect me of course it affected me at the time, but the after effects, and that's what I think people don't realize, is after the acute event, that trauma really, it manifests itself in different ways. Some are more destructive than others, but if you don't address it soon and you don't address the issues as fast as you can, they will manifest themselves. And that's exactly what happened with me. I came back from overseas, was working at Southern Command in Doral, and was drinking a bottle of whiskey a night to go to sleep, right? Just to self-medicate. And it took me a very long journey where I was, functioning well, was working for a 4-star, was doing the things that you're supposed to do. But it got to that point where it got to be too much, and I had to ask for help. And that was a journey for sure.
Yeah, man. So looking at the stats further, 8 million Americans, that equates to roughly 3.5% of the population.
Yeah.
Right. And that's those are who are diagnosed. What about the people who are undiagnosed?
Well, and especially in the veteran and first responder population, right? We're very stubborn. It took me years, right? It takes a lot of people. I have friends that still don't ask for help, right? Because there's that stigma of, hey, if I ask for help, I'm weak, right? Or it's going to affect my security clearance, or they're going to take my badge, they're going to take my gun, right? We've come a long way since then, but it's still a stigma that's affecting people from getting help, which is a big problem, right? That's why you see spikes in suicides, you see spikes in overdoses. That stigma kills. It really does.
Yeah, and suicide, that's something that crosses the bounds. I mean, it shows that military personnel are not, and police officers are not machines, right? They're human beings, but also
Right.
civilians. How many in our community is suffering and have no clue as to what's going on? They just don't feel right. Can you walk people through bouts of PTSD, like what a person experience, what a PTSD experience might look like?
Yeah,
to
for
help
sure.
people out.
And it's different for everybody, right? It's absolutely, it can manifest in different ways. Some people, it's not as destructive, but maybe it's not outwardly destructive, but it's internally destructive, right? So you're not going out and you see the traditional movies where you got the guy that's freaking out, the veteran, the crazy veteran narrative, right? He's freaking. That's usually not what happens, right? What happens is you've got people that are isolating themselves from their loved ones. They're doing a lot of things that are self-destructive, drinking, substances, bouts of anger, right? Panic attacks. A big one is lack of sleep, right? Because then if you're unable to sleep and you're having flashbacks or you're having nightmares, right? That then affects all of your other mental health, right? It's a big issue for the rest of your mental health, right? So it really depends on the person, but you see things like marriages being destroyed, right? Relationships with family members, right? A lot of times that isolation, family members that don't understand trauma and don't understand post-traumatic stress, they can see that as them doing that as a negative thing. But it's from my perspective, right? For my loved ones, I didn't talk about any of this stuff because I didn't want to burden them with my issues, right? And that's another piece where a lot of the family members that get affected, they get affected just as much from PTSD as we do in that sense. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I think that looking back and reflecting on my career and the members who are no longer here, right? Both civilians and law enforcement officers. And I could think of back to one particular instance where the officer committed suicide. He was suffering, but you could not tell that the guy was suffering, right?
Yep.
It only became evident that he had been suffering after the suicide. But what really struck me was that this is a guy that always wanted to help everyone. He was always seeking to help others, and he didn't want to burden anyone with his personal issues. But yet, you could, if we had paid more closer attention, you saw that he was having marital problems, exactly what you just said, marital problems.
Yep.
There was a problem with, he was drinking a little bit too much.
Yep.
Sometimes come to work. You tell that he was out partying. You couldn't smell it on his breath. You couldn't see it in his clothing, but you could see that he had been partying. And I think it's just that macho, having known the individual, it was that macho thing that if he had said that he was in trouble, if he had reached out for help, it was a time that, let's face it, administration would have looked down on him.
Of course. Yeah.
And maybe family would have looked at him as weak. What do you say to people like that?
I still run into it with some of the chiefs that we work with in some of the states, that we have clinics in, right? Where some of it is internal dialogue where it's like, hey, if X happens, if I say something, but then some of the leadership, right? This is where the problem comes in. Some of the leadership will, and you and I have talked about this in the past, they'll use mental health as a way to get rid of their problem children, right? Well, they'll say, hey, I'm going to send you to medical. We're going to send you to psych services because you're a pain to me and I want to get you out, right? So, there's kind of it's a two-edged sword, right? I think it's getting better now where leadership is starting to take it seriously, right? Now that we're seeing, but to your point, we're only seeing the signs when we do what we call forensics, right? When we're looking at the forensic, when you're looking at a suicide completion, right? And exactly like you're talking about, you're looking at the signs, the marital problems, could be financial problems. It could be a whole host of things that led to that. What are we doing to get upstream to make it where these guys and gals feel like they can get help without being judged, without having that stigma, without worrying about their career, their family, all of that stuff, right?
Yep. So let's segue something to something that your company, right? I guess I don't want to put words in your mouth, and I would like you to explain like what led up to this. But you're a co-founder of Forge Health. I know you founded some other behavioral, mental health type service oriented companies, but specifically to Forge Health, was it your advocacy work that led you to that? And then you obviously went to the U.S. government, and now you're recognized, and I believe you provide some funding, or they provide some funding for you. The Veteran Affairs. Talk to us a little bit about that and what you're doing in your clinical work.
Yeah, sure. And so I started this company with actually a guy I went to University of Miami with. We were in ROTC together at University of Miami. With his family, we started this together. He wasn't as smart as me. He went Army, he couldn't go.
Hey.
But so we, like, to get on a serious note here, but like, we had lost, it was our fourth friend to suicide, right? I was on my way. I was working in foreign policy for the US government. I was dealing with my own issues, right? I was getting past that. He was my best friend from the military as well as college. So he was helping me through that. And we lost another friend. And we said, you know what? Enough is enough. Let's do something about this. Obviously, the services aren't there enough, right? So instead of going against the grain and trying to start something in competition with the VA, we created a company that's in partnership with the VA, where we're basically, in the military, you would call it a force multiplier, right? Where we're able to be able there. And we hire master's level clinicians that are LICSWs, like licensed social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, and we have clinics in 10 states now, and we provide treatment in coordination with the departments, in coordination with the military and with the VA, right? So we are part of their community. It's called the Community Care Network. We're part of their Community Care Network. And basically what we're doing is helping to not let people fall through the cracks, right? A lot of this stuff, as a country, we don't have enough providers. There's not enough services out there, right? And with the, I think I forgot the amount of, I think it's almost 70,000 slots that the VA still needs to hire, that they are unable to hire right now, right? So and it's not just, I'm not just picking on the VA. That's a lot of healthcare systems are unable to hire enough people. So what are we doing? We're trying to provide almost like a safety net to be able to provide care for these folks.
So that is the name of your company's called Forge Health, right?
Yep, Forge
and
Health.
If somebody wants to find them online, where do they go?
Yeah, forgehealth.com. And our specific veteran and first responder is VFR. So it's forgehealth.com/VFR. And I was very lucky that I was able to hire and found the company with a bunch of Harvard professors, right, that were also military psychologists. And so we were able to really get our foot in the door in the right places to have those conversations that we needed to have, to be like, okay, cut the BS. Let's actually do things that are working, and let's actually get people care in a timely manner.
Yeah, I went through your website. It's very impressive for anybody that wants to check out Eric's company. It's called forgehealth.com. I encourage everyone to take a look at it. Are you servicing Florida?
We're on our way, actually. That's funny you mentioned that. Yeah. So we're currently in the Northeast right now. Our farthest south we got down right now is Virginia. So right outside of DC.
Come home, brother. Come home.
I know. We're doing it. We're doing it. It's just, it's taking a minute. It's taking a minute. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I was also looking at your, the philosophy of treatment and the style of treatment. If you maybe I'm mispronouncing the category, but it's big on behavioral therapy, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And one thing that I wanted to point out before we go there, was that just because people have PTSD or suffer from PTSD episodes does not mean that they're going to be diagnosed with a full diagnosis of PTSD, right?
Yeah, and I don't like the D aspect of, I call it PTS, right? And I know we have it on the site as PTSD just because it's on all the books, but like the disorder part of it makes it sound permanent, right?
Okay.
I'm a bigger fan of what they call, and this was studied at Duke University. They call it post-traumatic growth, right? So you can go through these traumatic events. And it's interesting. These guys at Duke came up, they went through this study and they studied these POWs, Vietnam POWs. And a lot of these folks you've probably heard, like Stockdale, and a lot of these folks that were.
Well, these are guys that were in the Hanoi Hilton?
That's right.
Hanoi Hilton, yeah. Okay.
That's right. And you saw that they went through some pretty extreme traumatic experiences. Yeah. And it's interesting that they took those experiences and they were able to grow from them, right? You're always going to have some sort of trauma that you have to work through, but they were able to take strength from those experiences. And that's really what we try to do, is get folks to that next stage of their life, right? I always tell people the military or serving in uniform does not need to be the last chapter of your life, right? That is, you are able to move through that. It is not, PTSD is not a death sentence. You can move past that and you can grow from that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it brings me back to the behavioral therapy, right? The model of that you guys are working around. And if you look up the definition of behavioral therapy, it basically attacks behavior, learned behavior. So I guess is that why people are able to overcome PTSD, conditions like PTSD, because they learn how to deal with them, or they learn that the behavior is not necessarily the right behavior? Can you give us a little bit of background on that?
Yeah, and it's and I'm always careful saying right or wrong behavior, right? What I always try to, it's reframing, right? And the other thing that we do is we try to give clinicians that work for us as many tools in their toolbox, right? So some do cognitive processing therapy, right? Where you're processing thoughts and things that are going through. Cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Which is exactly what you're talking about, is changing the behaviors and reframing how you are looking at those behaviors, right? Another thing that we do is EMDR, right? Which is it's a trauma focused thing that, you use either lights or your finger to help it. What I try to explain to people is trauma, besides the behavioral piece of this, PTSD and trauma changes the chemical makeup of your brain. This has been studied, right? So there are physical things that you can do that will help alleviate the trauma symptoms as well, right? And if you're able to alleviate those physical symptoms, right? If you're talking panic attacks, all the stress and all that other stuff, then you can work on the underlying behavioral or the underlying trauma issues, right? That's really where it's at. And it's not a one size fits all for everybody. Everybody's different, So
let's talk about what behavioral therapy is good for, because you just mentioned it, anxiety, depression, panic disorders, antisocial behavior.
Right.
Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And again, right, I think the symptoms, right? The symptoms. So this is where we get, it gets a little fuzzy here, right? Because a lot of people think that the SSRIs, the medications, right, that's going to be the cure, right? The medications are a tool. All of these things are a tool, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't work on the underlying trauma that's causing this stuff, right, that is you're going to get right back into that cycle, right? So really it is, we do what we call integrated care, where we're working with the physical health side, right? So if you're dealing with trauma and then you're also dealing with chronic pain, like a lot of us had to deal with heavy equipment, and it's easy to take painkillers or medication to cope with that and cope with the trauma, right? And then you get into that habit. So you have to address things holistically, right? So when you're addressing like trauma, you're addressing the anxiety, you're addressing the physical, antisocial behaviors, all that stuff, it can't be done in a vacuum. You can't be doing it one thing at a time. It has to be done holistically, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So I guess the most important thing are the three pillars of which not only you guys operate under, but those who are in similar fields or similar practices. And that's to identify, recognize, and manage the situation, right? But I think the problem often lies with recognition. Like, we all experience some level of panic, right, in our lives, right? We can be driving down the road and you get oh my God, I almost hit somebody, or somebody almost hit me. But it's really recognizing what's not healthy, what type of reactions are not healthy. And that's where they will have the biggest dilemma with. And I'd like to get your thoughts on, for the audience, what is the best way to deal with that and recognize whether you do have a problem or not?
Yeah.
Need attention.
Like anxiety is a evolutionary thing that kept us alive, right? When a saber-toothed tiger, I'm being kind of funny here, but when we were being hunted by saber-toothed tigers, right? It's nice to have that bit of anxiety from a fight or flight standpoint, right? Those are, to your point, recognizing what is healthy and what is unhealthy, right? Driving on 95 between Miami and Fort Lauderdale, everybody's got some anxiety, right? Like it's like you're gonna be anxiety, but it keeps you more aware. It keeps you. That's a healthy amount of anxiety, right? Where you're like, okay, I need to be aware of my surroundings. If you're sitting at a restaurant and you're checking the doors every 10 seconds and you're kind of thinking there's 360-degree threats, like you're back in Afghanistan, that's unhealthy, right? Or you're at home and those. Like recognizing, and I think that's where a lot of these therapies are super helpful. It's being able to identify that and being able to say, okay, I'm in a safe place here. I'm at my house. I'm in a restaurant. Like things are going to be fine, right? It's a lot easier said than done, right? But it takes time and it takes a while. The other piece I would say, the longer you're in therapy, the better your outcomes are long term, right? So meaning, if you can address these things and figure these things out, whether you're doing CPT or CBT, right, cognitive processing therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy, those are things that are going long-term to help you realize exactly what you're talking, Robert, is what's healthy, what's a healthy amount of anxiety, what's an unhealthy amount of anxiety, and what we would call hypervigilance, where you're always kind of around,
Yeah, man, as you're speaking, I can't express my gratitude enough to service providers like yourself who have helped me. I didn't realize that I know I have not diagnosed with PTSD, but I've had those episodes where I find myself back in a very critical situation where I think I'm under attack, and been able to work through them, and they have not occurred often. But man, the two times they've occurred in my life, I think it's been very scary, and I can only imagine how somebody who experiences them on a normal basis feels. So in the last 7-8 minutes that we have left, let me ask you this, Eric. What advice would you give our audience? Remember, our audience expands the public.
Yeah, for sure. I would say
who's struggling with silent struggle.
I would say, like, listen, we work with veterans and first responders. Like that's my, I've been doing that for almost a decade now since getting out of service, right? But to what I said in the beginning, right? Trauma is a normal part of life. You're going to experience trauma. You don't have to be in combat. You don't have to be a service member. You don't have to be a police officer. You don't have to be a firefighter. It's going to occur, right? I would say working on resilience would be a big piece of this, right? Is really understanding that the struggles that you're going through are not just, it's not anything that's weak with you. These are natural things that happen to our mind and our body that you can work through, and they're not permanent. You can get help to alleviate a lot of these things that are going through. And the other thing I would say is with, I always have to put in a plug for suicide prevention, right? And I'm going to say the new 988 number, right, is really important, right? If you're having thoughts of suicide, dial 988, and if you're a veteran, press 1. Remember, there are people out there that care about you, and whatever you're experiencing right now, you will get through, right? There have been times where I did not think that, and I've had friends that have made a permanent decision to temporary problems. A lot of friends, unfortunately. And just know that there's support out there and that people care about you and that you can get help if you need it, right? It's out there.
So as a takeaway, you're not alone.
You're not alone. You're not alone, and you'll get through this, right? You'll get through this. Like whatever you're going through. We've had spikes with kids, right? Of suicides with kids. I mean, it's affecting every community. It's across every community. There's a high level of stress right now. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world, right? People's anxiety levels are super high, financially, physically, all around, right? Rely on your friends and family, and you're not alone. And if you need that help, get the help that you need. There's no shame, right? It actually takes more courage to ask for help than to not ask for help.
That's true. Now that you brought up the children, the NIH, National Institute of Health, has a statistic on children that it says that it points to 43% of boys and 43% of girls between the younger than 18 at any given year will experience one incident that can lead to PTSD.
Yes.
43% of our children, almost half of our children. That's overwhelming.
It really is. It really is. And you're seeing it across every community, right? You're seeing it across every community. And I think, I honestly am concerned that we don't have enough visibility on it, right? Where we're not talking about it enough, right? And we're not talking about the resources that are out there. We're not talking about just in general. I think we've become, and COVID's made it a lot worse with the isolation piece of this, right? Yeah. So just that connective tissue that binds us together as humans and as Americans, we need to get back to that, right? I think that's going to help a lot.
So what's next for Eric Golnick?
Besides trying to get some sleep, huh? I listen, we're doing a lot of good work. I'm working a lot on the policy side of this stuff, and really trying to figure out workarounds, especially with active duty military. I'm working a lot with Congress and with the Senate to try to come up with some really great tools that can be used to help more and more, and not just with veterans and military members, but family members, right? So that's my next mission, is really trying to, from a policy perspective, we've got with what we're trying to do on the provider side, I'm really trying to get community health solutions across the finish line in DC. That's what I'm working on now.
So I'd love to help you with that. I'd love to collaborate on that, our show. But that brings us to the next point. Talking about resources. On our next show, Monday, we will be airing a live interview with Judge Stephen Leifman. If you haven't checked them out, I will send you a link, Eric. But
please, yeah,
it'll be up on the Community News website. His information. He's a pioneer in mental health court, doing a lot of work around diversion of those who need help for medical reasons and mental health reasons, rather than taking them through the system and just warehousing them and costing taxpayers dollars, but worse yet, doing harm not only to them, but if they get out, victims that they can come across. That'll be on Monday. We will also have the new crisis mobile response unit representative, the director of the Miami-Dade Crisis Response Mobile Unit will be here. She'll be providing some resources. And lastly, I think that I've heard from you, Eric, and a little takeaway. I would like to convene a roundtable where maybe we can have, yourself, some representatives that work with you, the judge, and a few other stakeholders, including law enforcement and civilian personnel, to come up with some solutions that we so desperately need, and how to address the silent struggle that many, if not most of us, deal with on a day basis. On that note, Eric, I'm going to tell you goodbye for this one, but don't go away, because we will talk a little more, and I hope to have you on in the next show, in the future shows. I hope to maybe go on site with you one day, and we can film from the field to give the people, the audience, a better perspective. On that note, I want to thank the Miami Community News team, the Miller brothers, our producer, Andres Peña, and all of you who are watching. Thank you. This has been a great show. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. Drop us a line. Let us know what you think.